At first glance, the juxtaposition between CAIRN and Baby Steps might seem purely mechanical. One is a surprisingly precise yet oddly beautiful climbing simulator. The other a deceptively delicate platformer emphasizing careful movement. Yet upon closer inspection, both games share a philosophical commonality. They demand respect for physicality, patience, and the nuanced mastery of risk and balance. In CAIRN, every slope, ledge, and hold requires an acute understanding of weight distribution, momentum, and environmental hazards. Baby Steps, though smaller in scope, mirrors this through the meticulous choreography of steps, timing, and spatial awareness. Both teach lessons about consequence and mindfulness in gameplay, challenging players to engage with systems that reward patience over brute force or recklessness. The appeal of these games extends beyond mechanical mastery. There is an elegance in their design, a sense of harmony between input and outcome that resonates deeply with players attuned to subtle feedback loops. CAIRN amplifies tension through verticality and environmental danger, while Baby Steps tempers frustration with incremental progression and forgiving or unforgiving design. Both games force a reconciliation between ambition and restraint, teaching players that success emerges not from domination, but from careful observation, deliberate action, and repeated refinement. This balance is where artistry meets gameplay, the intersection that creates experiences that are both challenging yet deeply satisfying. Moreover, the emotional impact of these games cannot be understated. The careful pacing, the near misses, and the thrill of mastering a particularly tricky sequence can generate a heightened sense of accomplishment, transforming routine gameplay into personal triumph. Both CAIRN and Baby Steps reward reflection as much as execution. Failure is instructive, patience is instrumental, and the player's growth mirrors the mastery of physical and mental skills over time. These are games that communicate their philosophy through play, allowing the mechanics themselves to teach resilience, strategy, and concentration. Ultimately, CAIRN and Baby Steps represent the power of restraint, challenge, and deliberate design in modern gaming. One of the most striking similarities between CAIRN and Baby Steps lies in how both games demand the player develop an almost meditative relationship with movement itself. In every other kind of modern game, locomotion is treated as a background mechanic, something invisible and automatic, a means of traversing space quickly in order to reach the real gameplay. Sprint buttons, generous jumps, double jumps, forgiving collision detection, and highly responsive animations ensure that the player rarely needs to think about the act of moving. These systems are intentionally designed to feel frictionless, prioritizing speed and empowerment over reflection. CAIRN and Baby Steps takes the opposite approach. Instead of removing friction, they elevate it to the central focus of the experience. Every step, every shift of weight, and every adjustment of position becomes meaningful, transforming movement from a trivial action into a complex and deliberate process that must be learned, respected, and carefully executed. In CAIRN, this philosophy manifests through its meticulous simulation of climbing mechanics, where the player must account for grip, positioning and stamina, and environmental geometry while navigating steep cliffs and unforgiving terrain. The mountain itself becomes an adversary, constantly challenging the player's understanding of balance and physical leverage. A poorly placed handhold or an overextension of the character's body can lead to catastrophic failure. It sends the player tumbling back down to the rock face, forcing a reassessment of strategy. The tension that emerges from this design is not derived from enemies or time limits, but from the precariousness of the environment itself. The mountain is indifferent, immovable, and entirely unforgiving, and the player must slowly adapt to its rules through patience and observation. This dynamic transforms climbing into a conversation between player and environment, where success depends not on aggression, but on careful interpretation of the terrain. Baby Steps, though visually simpler and far more comedic in tone, explores a remarkably similar design philosophy through its intentionally awkward walking mechanics. Controlling each step independently forces players to confront the absurd complexity of something humans normally learn to perform without conscious thought. What begins as a humorous gimmick quickly evolves into a surprisingly demanding exercise in coordination and timing. Each step must be planned and executed with care, as the characters' unstable gait can easily result in tumbling, falling, or losing forward momentum. The game's humor emerges from these moments of clumsy failure, yet beneath the very Australian sense of comedy lies a deeper appreciation for the physicality of movement itself. By stripping away the automatic fluidity that most games provide, Baby Steps exposes the delicate choreography that underlies even the simplest forms of locomotion. Ultimately, both games force players to slow down and reconsider their relationship with movement. Instead of rushing through environments in pursuit of objectives, players are encouraged to inhabit each step, each climb, and each adjustment of balance. The result is a gameplay experience that feels strangely intimate, as though the player is rediscovering the fundamentals of motion through trial and error. In a medium obsessed with often speed and spectacle, this deliberate focus on the fragility and complexity of movement feels almost revolutionary. Another profound design philosophy shared between CAIRN and Baby Steps lies in how both titles fundamentally reframe the concept of failure. In much of contemporary game design, failure is softened, diluted, or hidden behind layers of accessibility systems intended to preserve momentum and minimize frustration. Frequent checkpoints, generous auto corrections, and forgiving mechanics ensure that mistakes rarely carry significant consequences. While these systems undoubtedly make games more approachable, they also reduce the weight of player decisions, subtly discouraging the kind of reflective learning that arises when mistakes actually matter. CAIRN and Baby Steps rejects this philosophy almost entirely. Instead of insulting players from failure, they place it directly at the center of experience, transforming mistakes into the primary mechanism through which mastery is achieved. In doing so, they revive an older design principle in which failure is not a punishment but a necessary teacher, one that communicates lessons more effectively than success ever could. In CAIRN, this philosophy is expressed through the unforgiving nature of the mountain itself. A single moment of overconfidence, an impromptly placed handhold, a misjudged shift in weight, or a poorly calculated leap can cause the climber to lose stability and plummet down the cliff face. These falls are not merely mechanical setbacks, but dramatic reminders of the environment's indifference. The mountain does not adapt to the player's mistakes, nor does it soften its hazards in response to repeated attempts. Instead, it remains entirely consistent, allowing players to gradually decode its logic through repeated encounters with failure. Each fall becomes a form of feedback, communicating subtle information about balance, positioning, and terrain that the player may not have fully understood before. Over time, players begin to internalize these lessons, developing an almost instinctive sense for which surfaces are reliable and which movements are too risky to attempt. By contrast, Baby Steps approaches failure with a more comedic tone, yet the underlying design philosophy remains strikingly similar. Watching the protagonist collapse awkwardly after a poorly timed step can be undeniably hilarious, transforming mistakes into moments of slapstick entertainment rather than a source of genuine frustration. Yet beneath the Aussie sense of humor lies a sophisticated mechanical challenge that encourages players to carefully analyze their actions. Every stumble invites reflection, because was the stride too wide, the timing too rushed, the momentum poorly controlled? The game subtly encourages experimentation, inviting players to test the boundaries of its unusual movement system until they gradually develop a sense of rhythm and coordination. What initially appears as chaotic slowly reveals a hidden logic, rewarding patience and persistence within the satisfying realization that mastery is possible even within the most awkward mechanics. Ultimately, both games cultivate a mindset in which failure is not feared but embraced as an essential component of progress. The player's journey becomes less about avoiding mistakes and more about learning from them, transforming each setback into an opportunity for refinement and growth. Beyond their shared mechanical emphasis on movement and failure, CAIRN and Baby Steps also converge around a deeper thematic idea, balance as both a literal mechanic and a philosophical principle. On the surface, both games revolve around maintaining physical equilibrium. In CAIRN, the climber's survival depends on carefully distributing weight across handholds and footholds, constantly adjusting posture to prevent a fatal loss of stability. In Baby Steps, the protagonist's awkward gait requires players to coordinate individual steps with delicate precision, maintaining balance through controlled and deliberate movement. Yet while these mechanics function as immediate gameplay challenges, they also subtly communicate broader ideas about patience, restraint, and the delicate equilibrium required to navigate complex systems successfully. In CAIRN, the act of climbing becomes a metaphor for confronting overwhelming challenges through persistence and humility. The mountain towers above the player as an immense and indifferent force, one that cannot be conquered through brute strength or reckless ambition. Attempting to rush upward inevitably results in disaster, as the environment punishes impatience with swift and unforgiving consequences. Instead, progress demands careful observation and deliberate action. The climber must constantly evaluate their position, anticipate potential hazards, and move forward with calculated caution. Each successful maneuver represents a movement of harmony between player and environment, a fragile equilibrium achieved through patience and attentiveness. The mountain becomes less an obstacle to defeat and more a system to understand, encouraging players to develop a respectful relationship with the terrain they traverse. Baby Steps mirrors this philosophy in a far more playful yet surprisingly insightful manner. The protagonist's exaggerated clumsiness forces players to abandon their instinct to charge forward recklessly. Instead, they must slow down and approach each step with deliberate care, maintaining balance but not only physically as well as mentally. The humor of the characters' awkward movements does not undermine this lesson. Rather, it reinforces the importance of patience by highlighting the absurd consequences of rushing. When the character stumbles or collapses due to careless input, the moment is both funny and instructive, gently reminding the player that stability often requires restraint. Over time, players begin to develop a rhythm to their movements, discovering that progress emerges not from speed, but from maintaining control over each individual step. Taken together, these experiences reveal balance as more than a mechanical requirement. It becomes a guiding philosophy embedded within the designs of both games. They encourage players to cultivate a mindset of attentiveness where every action is considered and every movement deliberate. This emphasis on equilibrium feels refreshingly introspective. By asking players to slow down and respect the fragility of their actions, CAIRN and Baby Steps transform balance into a metaphor for thoughtful engagement, both within the game and perhaps beyond it. In an era of gaming increasingly defined by scale, spectacle, and constant stimulation, CAIRN and Baby Steps stand out as remarkable examples of how restraint can produce deeply memorable experiences. Rather than overwhelming players with rapid-fire action or complex systems layered upon one another, both games focus intensely on a single fundamental concept: movement. By stripping gameplay down to its most essential elements, stepping, climbing, balancing, they reveal just how rich and engaging these seemingly simple mechanics can become when explored with sufficient depth and care. This design philosophy allows players to rediscover aspects of interaction that are often taken for granted, transforming routine actions into sources of tension, discovery, and genuine accomplishment. Ultimately, CAIRN and Baby Steps serve as reminders that some of the most compelling ideas in gaming emerge not from adding more systems, more mechanics, or more spectacle, but from exploring a single concept with extraordinary attention and care. Their shared emphasis on balance, patience, and physical awareness transforms movement into a language through which the games communicate their philosophy to the player. By slowing the player down and encouraging thoughtful interaction, they reveal the quiet joy of mastering something simple, a reminder that sometimes the most meaningful progress in games, as in life, begins with a single, carefully placed step.